Welcome to the Covered Bridges in New Hampshire podcast, where we discuss all things related to covered bridges in the Granite State. Here's your host, Kim Chandler.
Hello, Covered Bridge people, and welcome to the podcast. Today we're speaking with Bob Watts, co-vice president of the National Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges. Bob explores the career and innovations of early bridge builder Timothy Palmer, his groundbreaking river crossings, and his role in establishing the covered timber truss tradition in the United States. Here we go. In this episode, we explore the legacy of Timothy Palmer, a pioneering builder of covered timber truss bridges. In 1792, Palmer constructed the first bridge to span the Merrimack River in Newburyport, and in 1805, he built the first covered bridge in the United States. To help tell Palmer's story, we're joined by Bob Watts, co-vice president of the National Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges. Bob returns to the podcast after appearing in the inaugural episode of Season 1. A photographer with deep roots in the covered bridge community, Bob spent 37 years traveling throughout New England and upstate New York with Nikon during the rise of digital photography. Along the way, he connected with Joseph Conwell, widely regarded as one of the most knowledgeable figures in the field, who encouraged him to attend NSPCB meetings. Bob later became a life member. Now retired and based in Newburyport, Bob remains closely tied to the region's history. He serves on the board of the Museum of Old Newbury, which houses a rare portrait of Palmer, and he continues to photograph almost every day. Welcome back to the podcast, Bob.
Thank you.
Thanks for talking to me today. So today we're going to talk about Timothy Palmer, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about his life before he began building bridges. So he was born August 22nd, 1751 in Raleigh, Mass. And do we know much about his childhood and his family and how they ended up in the Newburyport area?
So the family did move from Raleigh at one point to Boxford, Mass., which was just one town over, then back to Raleigh. There really are very little details about those early days, early 1700s.
Mm-hmm.
In the late 1700s, Newburyport was becoming quite the bustling small city. Known as the Clipper City, its major industry was shipbuilding, with more than 2,000 ships built, including some of the fastest and largest of clipper ships.
Wow.
Trading was huge, from China to India. People complain how much we buy from China, but we have been buying from them for hundreds of years, more
Right.
than just tea.
Right.
Also, trade to the Caribbean with molasses and sugarcane coming here, all for the production of rum. At
Mm.
one point, Newburyport had over 11 rum factories. One
Wow.
right where I live. It was called Caldwell Rum, 1771 to 1961. It is supposed that he associated himself with the carpenters and shipbuilders of Newburyport and the surrounding towns. That's a quote from Richard Sanders Allen.
Mm.
The earliest report I see is that even at the age of 10, 1761, he had an active interest in public affairs. He and 30 others formed in 1761 the Dernier Resort Fire Society. Not quite sure where that name come from.
Huh.
A volunteer firefighting organization in Newburyport. All to aid in local firefighting. It required members to have 2 good leather buckets, 2 strong bags, and a knapsack for food and clothing.
Wow. And he did that when he was 10?
And that's when he was 10.
Wow. That's amazing. So, and this little tidbit makes me pretty happy as a DAR member. So, when he was 24, he responded to the Lexington Alarm, and which was the first battle of the Revolutionary War, and he marched 45 miles from Newburyport to Concord and Lexington. I can't imagine. And he later served as a private with the militia fighting at the Battle of Bunker Hill, and he served about 3 months before coming home. And when he came home, he apprenticed with well-known architects and millwrights Daniel and Moody Spofford, who designed and constructed many churches and meeting houses in the area, including Palmer designed the Rocky Hill Meeting House in 1785. Can you tell us about that?
That was a point, where the Rocky Hill Meeting House today, which is owned by Historic New England, it incorporated a series of truss systems, which again is something he learned from the Spofford father and son. It allowed a large roof and a ceiling to be supported without interior columns being needed. It allowed for a large open space to be created. I've been in that building. It really is quite amazing. You have this large space with um, no visible supports from any beams in the middle. So
That's excellent. And we know that so on May 30th, 1791, 43 investors petitioned the court to allow them to build a set of bridges connecting Newburyport to Deer Island and then Deer Island to Salisbury. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
yeah, sure. This is an amazing point in the history. The investment was $36,397, and
Wow.
that's in the dollars of the day. It's a huge amount in those
Mhm.
times. The bridges were built in the short span of 7 months and opened in November 1792. As of May 1807, 14 years, tolls averaged over 4,000 per year. So this was considered a good investment.
Right.
And they also, part of the agreement was that a tavern would be allowed for them to build, which was also an additional moneymaker. Why was that? This being the first bridge crossing of the Merrimack, it became a vital and important part of the infrastructure for people, goods, and products to move more easily up to and down from Maine and New Hampshire and on to Boston and other places south. So, I that part is really important, I think, how to move goods and products easily. Important
Mhm.
part. Infrastructure is an important part.
Right. And I read that, the matter was considered and reconsidered and there was a lot of back and forth about it and people were not particularly happy about those bridges. Can you talk about that?
So sometimes I refer to, when that bridge went in as, disruptive technology, and I'll
Right.
explain that a little bit. Fishermen feared the bridge would inhibit spanning fish from going further upriver. There are sturgeon in this river. They're an
Mm.
ancient fish. Only about 15 rivers on the East Coast do. It's a 2 million-year-old species.
Wow.
Towns of Haverhill and Amesbury feared piers or abutments might affect the flow of incoming high tides going up the river.
Mm.
Boat owners felt the bridges would impede travel up and down the river. These three reasons are all unreasonable.
Mhm.
The wooden truss over the narrow river section, Newburyport to Deer Island, had an extra set of braces underneath on each end, and that was a reasonable complaint that it did reduce the width of passing through. Though the bridge on the other half had a hinged drawbridge for the taller, masted ships.
Mhm.
And as I said before, a bridge was considered by some as a disruptive technology. I like that phrase. It's kind of used even today.
Yeah.
And who did it disrupt? So, for over 100 years, the only way to get people and goods across the river was by ferrymen.
Mm.
They were slightly unreliable, slow, limited cargo space, but they were very unhappy about losing their livelihood.
Right.
I figure at over 100 years, that's about uh, eight eight generations of that family losing out on their livelihood.
Well, and I would imagine too that transporting some things via ferry is not particularly practical, like
No, the
cattle.
cows used to have to swim alongside.
Oh,
Because
jeez.
the ferries were pretty small. There are some reports too of, again, the guy may have fallen asleep or something. It was just an unreliable way to go.
Right. And that river doesn't freeze in the winter, does it?
Not really.
Yeah.
It can get some, good chunks of ice moving through it, but it's a very powerful river coming
Right.
down out of the up in New Hampshire. It's a very powerful river.
Yeah. So you couldn't cross it on the ice like you could some of the smaller
No, no,
rivers?
it's
No.
very tidal. It's tidal, even another 2 miles beyond where this bridge is. So
Mhm.
there's too much movement up and down.
So do we know how Timothy Palmer was hired to build these bridges?
It's really not known how Palmer secured the contract to build this first bridge, but apparently his association with the respected Moody Spofford was helpful.
Yeah. And so in 1792, Palmer designed and built these two bridges, which were the first of their kind, and they were not initially covered bridges. I'm using air quotes, but they were a different type of bridge. Can you describe those bridges?
Yes, this new Palmer bridge design had influences from the ages, concepts of the strength of an arch, and then the design of trusses to allow spanning great horizontal distances had never been seen before. It has been written that he was the first American to utilize the truss in a way that was inspired by Palladio, an Italian Renaissance architect from the 1500s in Italy. In its first year, it was visited, observed, and written about by many scholarly types. Here are a few quotes. The two large arches, superior to anything on the continent. Another one, invented by Mr. Timothy Palmer, an ingenious housewright of Newburyport, and appears to unite elegance, strength, and firmness beyond the sanguine expectation. Palmer may well be called the Nestor of American bridge builders for this bridges and the others he built over the next 15 years. I had to go look up Nestor. It's described
Oh,
as it's a wise, experienced, and venerable old man or a sage leader.
wow.
Yeah, pretty cool.
And can you tell me about the arches?
So the arches were actually built with, well, in today's world, sometimes we think of laminates, but they purposely looked for trees that had curves to them, so that when they, took them down and then split them to be into pieces, there was already a natural curve to it. Um, and
Okay.
that's the arch part, but the truss, the trusses are what supported it, which are the kind of cross pieces that are then linked to the arch. Um, so that 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 was where they made this curved arch from.
Okay. And there was a big party to celebrate the bridge on Deer Island on July 4th, 1794. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it was the bridge. Well, bridges really opened on December 1793. The grand opening was on July 4th, 1794, celebrating Independence Day in 1793, what would have been the 10th anniversary of the end of the Revolutionary War in 1783. Newburyport's bon vivant Lord Timothy Dexter gave an address for the event.
So the bridges were not initially covered, but one of them was covered sometime around 1810. Do we know why the bridge was covered?
Palmer really did have instinctually the concept to cover the bridges. Um, and he advocated strongly for covering those trusses. The investor became aware that a bridge with a roof and walls over it would have a much longer life, protecting their investment. The one on the Deer Island to Salisbury side was covered 5 years later. Um, and that's we'll be talking a little bit more about where he went um, after building this bridge.
Right. And what happened to those bridges?
So the shorter South Side Bridge which had 60 tons of wood in it,
Wow.
was replaced in 1810, only 17 years old, with another first in the U.S., an iron chain link suspension bridge. First chain, then a cable suspension type bridge, also a first in the world. Designed by Templeman and Finley, but project manager was Timothy Palmer.
Wow.
The one on the north side over time was expanded to become a double-barreled covered bridge to handle traffic in both directions.
Nice.
It also was a flat-type bridge with a narrow drawbridge that could be pulled up for tall sail masts to be able to pass through.
And in 1794, so the same year that those bridges opened, Palmer came up to New Hampshire and he built the Piscataqua Bridge across Great Bay, which is a big area. And the Piscataqua River, I know this because I used to work for Portsmouth Harbor Cruises, has the second fastest tidal current navigable by ship in the continental United States. I've known that little fact for a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's not easy to build a bridge there. And that bridge was 2,258 feet long, 38 feet wide, and the water was 52 feet deep. And when it opened, it was the longest bridge in the world. Can you talk
I
about that bridge?
isn't that amazing? And
Yes.
I was fascinated diving into that. At first, my gut reaction was it wanted to be able to go to Maine easily. But really, initially, there were two reasons for wanting this crossing.
Hmm.
One, to expedite the travel from Portsmouth up to Concord, New Hampshire. And this is via what is the first New Hampshire Turnpike. It
Hmm.
was 36 miles, built in the late 1790s, and later known as Route 4 today.
Right.
Connecting to this new Piscataqua Bridge, the connection points for Cedar Point. I had to go look these up, on the map. The connection points were Cedar Point, Dover, and Fox Point Road in Newington,
Hmm.
with a Goat Island, and again, the popular tavern that the investors built on it, to Ram Island, and then to Newington. Palmer's 244-foot arch truss bridge was between Goat Island and Ram Island. The total of the three segments, as you mentioned, was 2,258 feet, the longest span in the world at the time.
Wow.
With a cost of almost $66,000 in the dollar values of the time, it was all from private investors and paid for with collection of tolls and the profits from the very popular tavern.
Mm.
The second reason was to expedite travel from Maine towards Boston by saving the time of having to go all the way around the Great Bay and then heading towards Newburyport and the new Palmer-built Essex Merrimack Bridge, which was the first bridge crossing of the Merrimack River in 1793. And then that was a straight shot towards Boston and Cambridge.
Right.
There were other reasons at the time, and this is things I learned recently too from the road to the revolutionary talks we've had, is as of the American Revolution, privateering, which is really stealing ships, by the English and us was prevalent.
Hmm.
Then the Jefferson embargo of 1800 renewed privateering and the impressment of American seamen. All involved considerable risk for travel by sea versus travel by land, along with the general need for expanding infrastructure and roads and bridges.
Hmm.
I thought that was pretty
Yeah,
an aspect that you don't really think about,
that's right.
that
That's
and
right.
privateering. We had a whole talk on privateering. Privateering was a big deal.
I bet.
Um,
I bet. Well, and having lived in that area, going all the way around Great Bay is not convenient when you want to get from Dover to Portsmouth. Having
correct.
that bridge is, I'm sure, made a lot of people's travel plans a lot easier. And here's a bridge that I've talked about. I talk about this in my covered bridge programs, but Palmer built what is documented as the first covered bridge built in North America in Philadelphia in 1805, and it was called the Schuylkill Permanent Bridge, which is a very unique name considering that the bridge wasn't permanent. Can you talk about that bridge, why it was called that?
Yeah, there's pictures and drawings of it, and I say it was called the, Schuylkill Permanent Bridge. The Schuylkill River comes down from the northwest and literally goes right through the center of Philadelphia and then joins into the Delaware River. So even at this point, 1805, even Philadelphia did not have a bridge crossing either the Delaware or the Schuylkill,
Wow.
which, when you think about it, is pretty amazing too.
Right.
And there, the investors, were kind of, they were open to the fact of protecting their investment by putting a covering it and putting a roof over it.
Right. And that bridge was 550 feet long, which is it's a good sized bridge. I mean, the longest existing wooden covered bridge right now is only 460 feet long
Right.
in Cornish. And so what was so special about it?
So in 1803, the company contracted to build a bridge there, and a local crew had already built the two abutments and then two river piers under very difficult conditions, to do that. They reached out to Palmer to design the three arch truss bridges to span the entire length of 150 feet, 195 feet, and 150 feet from shore to shore, even with cost overruns on the piers and abutments. Now the project was approaching 300,000. It was strongly advised by Palmer that, in his opinion, all wooden bridges should be covered.
Mhm.
Long-term planning to protect the investment.
Right.
An uncovered bridge and the effects of winter would have a life expectancy of only 10 to 12 years. Cover it, and that jumps to 40 to 60 plus years.
Right.
This bridge is recognized as the first bridge built to completion as the first covered bridge.
Mhm.
It was handsome, beautiful, and functional. A major improvement to the infrastructure of Philadelphia, America's second largest city.
Right. What was the first largest at the time?
New
New
York.
York? New York.
Yeah.
And that bridge was replaced only 45 years later in 1850. Why?
So they were arches between the piers and the abutments, curved arches. In 1850, it was replaced by another with a horizontal deck, no arch in the overall designs. It enabled it to carry railroad traffic as well as carriage and pedestrian traffic.
Okay. So by taking the arches out,
Take the arches out, the
made it
trains
wider. Yeah.
could easily
Okay.
cross it.
Right. And Palmer invented and later patented the arch type construction for wooden bridges, which is a pretty remarkable thing for somebody skilled in house building. And people call him a genius. What do you think of that?
Well, a genius has been defined as someone who sees what everyone else sees, but thinks what no one else has thought. I
Yeah.
like that kind of a quote. This
Yeah.
definition applies to Timothy Palmer.
Yeah, it sure does. So we know in his personal life, so in December of 1779, he married a woman named Anna Wyatt, and she died 7 years later at age 32. And in 1795, he married again to a woman named Hannah Downer, and he had no children from either marriage and is buried with his first wife. Do we know much about his life outside of bridge building and house building?
Yeah, he always was taking an active interest in the public affairs in town, and he was appointed the surveyor of highways and parks in 1800. And he held these positions through his retirement years and until his death, December 19th, 1821. One comment noted was that the city is much indebted to him for the regularities of its streets and the improvements of the public grounds and ways. Under his directing genius, the Bartlett Mall began to assume shape and symmetry, and Market Square was laid out. So, again, a quote from Richard Sanders Allen.
Right. So I know you live in Newburyport, and how important is Palmer to that town? And I guess my other question would be, are the streets still laid out the same as they were when he laid them out?
Yes, they are.
That's great.
We have, a beautiful the market square in the downtown is the focal point, and that Bartlett Mall, and
Yeah.
just for your curiosity, mall is spelled Mall, and most of us would say mall, but when I first moved here and I said mall, I got corrected several times, and they knew I wasn't born here. So, the site of his first bridge crossing is currently called the Chain Bridge, and it has the distinction of being the first suspension type bridge in the world, 1810.
Wow.
It is still an important crossing for us, especially for connecting to Route I-95 north to Maine and south to Boston, and they're via magnificent steel arch bridges, the John Greenleaf Whittier Bridge. There's even a bike path on the bridge, and the view from it looks right at the Palmer Bridge location, and it's
Oh,
quite an
nice.
incredible sight. Um, Also nearby to all this is the entrance to 495,
Mhm.
taking one westward and south. I've done several talks on Palmer and travel infrastructure innovations. There has always been good interest. I'm on the board of Newburyport's oldest museum, 1877, and
Mhm.
we have a very rare portrait of Mr. Palmer.
Oh,
My goal will be to build a prominent display on Mr. Timothy Palmer's history and legacy.
that's great.
My closing remark is a descriptive and a Richard Sanders Allen write up on Palmer. The celebrated architect and bridge builder, he had other qualities, which is a pity that they are not more common. He was remarkable for his single heartedness and the frank Yankee directness of his character, and the simple but warm benevolence of his disposition. This so reminded me of our own Arnold Grayton, a second generation bridge builder from New Hampshire. A lifetime member of the National Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges, he has been building and fixing them since his youth, working with his father, Milton Grayton. And then well into his 80s, he continued to build and repair covered bridges. He passed through the final portal last year, and may he always rest in peace. So
Yeah.
I know you asked about Palmer is recognized. The only thing I can say though is really his primary gift at first was the use of trusses to be able to cross large horizontal distances,
Mm.
because you wouldn't find a tree with a single trunk that could do that.
Right.
But everybody knows it for the as the chain bridge, because even today it's a suspension type bridge. But it was really that first truss built system, um, and to be able to do that was quite an amazing feat in those days, and was
Mhm.
a big part of the expansion of our country to be able to move easily with large loads, and um, be able to have a bridge instead of waiting around for a ferry.
Right. Well, and it sounds like, his genius was for all bridges, not just covered
Yes.
bridges.
Yeah.
And I wonder if his insistence on covering something that they had spent so much money and so much time on started a trend, for other communities to start covering their bridges as well, and I wonder if he's responsible.
Yeah, absolutely, and the other kind of a concept I noticed too was we didn't have federal funding or state funding or even city funding to build infrastructures. It was all private investment in the beginnings. And so those 39 investors, they each put $1,000 in. Of course, they want a return on their money. It's
Right.
an investment thing. And of course, the taverns usually nearby were always a great addition. But
Yeah.
the concept that, we were building by private investing versus, from a state or a federal funding, I thought was kind of interesting.
Right. No, it definitely is. Well, thank you for talking to me today about Timothy Palmer. I know that you do have a vested interest in covered bridges, as also you're also a lifetime member, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And I know you work hard to ensure that our covered bridges that we have stand today. And I want to thank you too for linking the conversation back to Arnold Grayton. He was a very important member
I
of
know
the
you
covered
know that.
bridge
Yeah.
community, and he's very missed. Very
Yeah,
missed.
he is. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming back onto the podcast for season 2, and thanks for talking to me today, Bob.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. Nice to talk to you, Kim.
The Covered Bridges of New Hampshire podcast is created and hosted by me and recorded in Hancock, New Hampshire. The song Old New Hampshire was arranged and performed by Josh Black. Our introduction is courtesy of Greg Kretschmar. This podcast is a companion to my book, Covered Bridges of New Hampshire. You can learn more about the book, explore blog posts, view covered bridge videos and photographs, check event listings, and access an interactive covered bridge map at coveredbridgesnh.com. Follow Covered Bridges of New Hampshire on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube for additional content and updates. If you enjoy the podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Kim Chandler. Thank you for listening.